Antonio Rodiles, opposition leader from Cuba. Great pleasure to have you here in Washington. I think it's extraordinarily important that the people here in the United States, and for that matter around the world, continue to care about what's happening in Cuba and be more and more informed. You're a physicist. How does a physicist come to be facing this immovable object of the Cuban regime?
I think it's because of a logic thought. I went to Cuba. After some time, I was living outside in Mexico and US. Because I was realizing that I want to be in my country. I want to see, I want to get all in my country. When I go back, I realize that it is impossible to live in this kind of country. It is impossible to live in a place where the government wants to control everything, where you cannot speak out, where you cannot meet with your friends and say whatever you want. And then my immediately conclusion was I need to get involved in a kind of movement to change the country. And then we start with a project that is called Estado Exact, where we start to organize debates, exposition, we start to show independent movies. And there are something that always happen in totalitarian regimes. If you want to be free, they try to stop you, or at the same time, they push you to be more involved. They say you cannot do this, and then you have two options. Okay, you stop to do this, or if you try to continue, they are going to start to arrest you, they are going to start to arrest you, and then this is pushing you in the way to be in the opposition movement. Then that's happened with me. I think that many people have faced exactly the same reaction. They get a little involved, and at the same time the secret police or the political police push you to be more active in your activities. No?
Tell us a little bit about a historic meeting you had with President Barack Obama in Havana recently. Tell us a little bit about your exchange, his reaction, whether that gave you hope as someone advocating change in Cuba.
Well, I think that the historical meeting was a good opportunity to tell directly to the president what we see is happening right now in our country. I think we are facing a really critical situation. Almost after 60 years, the regime is trying to change in order to transfer the power to their family. Here we are facing a kind of tropical dynasty from Raul Castro to his son. We want to give the clear idea to the president that we are really concerned about that the regime can do that. We want to stop this plan. And that's why we were talking with him about what we think that we need also as a Cuban opposition and also as a Cubans in order to avoid that and to take our country in the direction of a real democracy and to establish in our country a rule of law.
Now, before you tell us what his reaction was, I think this is extraordinarily important. The impression that the American people was given is that the president's change in policy, his engagement of the regime, increased the chances of some sort of economic and political opening, and increased the chances of a transition beyond the Castros. But you're actually talking that in recent months, really, since the president's initiative, the Castros have sort of introduced this Plan B, this dynastic transition. That's, I think, extraordinarily important. What was the president's reaction when you raised these issues with him?
He was listening. He was listening to all the people that were in the place, especially Berta Soler, another person that he's a fighter for freedom too. And she is also inside of the Forum for the Rights and Freedom. This is the political platform where we are together. She was giving also a strong message about the violation of the human rights. And he was listening all the message from all different peoples. And he was mentioning that the compromise that the U.S. has with the promotion of the human right, to the defense of the human rights. But we insist that we need more support to face the reality that the government is to face the way that the government is behaving in Cuba. They are completely focused to finish with the opposition movement. They are completely focused in the plan of the dynasty transfer of power, and we are in total compromise to stop that. I think he understood, but for sure they already have one agenda, and I think that it is important to read for the reality what is happening, and then from that to change it if it's the necessity. And I think that it is important that the president can listen, that probably they have some plans, they have some idea about what they want to provoke in the Cuban society, but right now we understand that the regime is the one that is taking more advantage of the new policy. We need a change in that. We need that the real benefits from this new policy be the Cuban people. And we are focused to engage the American government to be involved in the kind of change that is to provoke a real change to democracy in Cuba.
Mm-hmm. Essentially, you're asking the president to keep his word, asking the American people to keep their word. The president spoke when he was in Havana in a broadcast that was that the regime let out in very profound terms. The president made an intense defense of democracy, human dignity, the necessity of empowering the Cuban people so they can build a better life for all of the people in Cuba, and for that matter, to mend with the Cuban diaspora that lives in Miami. But again, very stout defense of democracy, and this voice being heard throughout the island of Cuba. Tell us a little bit about the reaction of the Cuban people. Did this build hope in the Cuban people in a way that you think will be a meaningful, have a meaningful corrosive effect on the ability of the regime to keep things under control?
To be honest, in my case, I was expecting more. But this is my case. I am involved in the political process, and I am part of that process. My colleagues that are also involved, we expect that the president be talking clearly about the opposition movement, about the repression that we are suffering. But at the same time, we understand that the speech was a good speech for most of the Cubans. They got the message. They saw for the first time, almost 60 years after, to see a president from a democratic country talking about democracy, talking about freedom, and people receive in a really good way this message. I think that part of the visit was important, and I think that for sure is going to have an impact in the Cuban society. Even though we are expecting more actions, we are expecting more action because we are facing a really repressive situation right now. The regime is behaving more violent every day, especially against women. They decide to beat everybody that try to speak out, to say what they think. And honestly, we need more engagement from the international community in the issues of democracy and promotion of human rights.
Right, and you know, these words, Stalinist dictatorship, totalitarian dictatorship, repression, they all sort of sound political science, clinical, but I think the American people don't understand that, you know, if they were to Google your name, Antonio Rodiles, and images, they would see you looking very differently than you do now because, frankly, the regime beat the hell out of you. And Berta Soler, same thing. And the Google ladies in white images, and on a weekly basis, yes, dragging women down the street because they want to go to mass or they want to talk about human rights, or beating you senseless. I think right around the president's visit. You know, what are the costs that people like you pay for standing up to this regime?
It's difficult to explain because you were talking about the physical cost that we are paying, but we pay also another kind of cost. They try they are interacting over our family. They want to make pressure over our families. The psychological pressure too. They always are sending the message that they have the control of our life. I cannot explain you the difference that we feel when we get outside of the country and we land here in US and we can visit our friends and talk, and we don't feel that something is watching everything that we are doing, listening everything that we are doing. It's difficult to explain when you are living inside of a totalitarian country. What do you feel when you go to a free country? I think, but at the same time, we feel that it is necessary to keep moving in the direction that
Right.
we're doing.
And in point of fact, you're in a hurry to get back to Havana, right?
Yes,
Back to
yes.
Cuba.
Yes, in a few days we are going to be back in Havana. But when we are visiting the free countries and we go back, we go with more strength. We feel more engaged to fight for the freedom of our country. And I think that even if the way is a hard way, I think I am completely sure that we are going to win, and soon we are going to have a democratic Cuba for everybody.
Right. Well, I think the president was dead on when he said, you know, if you want to see what Cuban people can do, look at South Florida.
Exactly.
Look at Miami.
Exactly.
And I think that is a very compelling point. When we organized this event and spoke about it publicly, I received a message from a Cuban American, very earnest, sincere message saying, I hope you're not too tough on the president's opening to Cuba, because quite frankly, he's trying to extend some economic opportunity to these poor people. Let me ask you, does the Cuban regime keep people poor as a means of control? Because a lot of people just think that, well, that's socialism. Guess what? It doesn't work. But I'm firmly convinced, give away the ending here, that it is a means of control. Yes, I mean, socialism doesn't work. I mean, you have a sugar harvest at 1918 levels or whatever it is. But I think also if you have Cubans, 11 million Cubans, most of them, vast majority of them, just thinking about how am I going to feed my kids today, it makes less likely that they're going to be involved in opposing the regime. It's probably a little bit of both, but what are your thoughts?
I think that there is a kind of synergy in this logic, synergy. Mm-hmm. There is a kind of synergy in what you are mentioning. In one hand, you have that the government knows that if the people are living in a miserable condition, if the people are poor, they don't have time, they don't have the tools to face the regime. But at the same time, when you have a totalitarian regime, and the main goal of everything is to keep the power, that dynamics also provoke misery in the country.
Right.
Then I think that this is something that is like a cycle, no?
Mm-hmm.
They want to keep the power, and this is provoking misery, and at the same time the misery provoke that they easily keep the power. Mm-hmm. This is something like it's a cycle, and for sure we need to break that.
Right, the very definition of the vicious cycle. And what role can we play? I mean, the president's proposition now is if we can extend new alternatives for partnerships with the Cuban regime, that it will gradually change, that it will allow a little more economic space. We're only a year or so into this proposition, but have there been meaningful, irreversible openings by the regime, or has the regime actually, we know they have in terms of violent repression, but on the economic side, have they actually ratcheted down, reduced the opportunities for the Cuban people?
The regime is clear, is so clear in what they want to do, and they even are speaking about that. But the logic is completely focused in to transfer the power to their families. I think they are focusing that. They know that to do that, they need in some moment to give the idea that they are going to make certain change, because they cannot keep the same style of communist totalitarian regime. But at the same time, they are moving carefully in order to don't lose the power. I am completely sure they have been talking about that. They are not going to give really economic opportunities for the Cuban people, because they know that if they start to move in that direction, sooner or later they are going to lose the control. And they are completely afraid also about the Cuban American community that is just 90 miles from Cuba. They are so clear in what they need to do, and they sometimes try to create a kind of fantasy that they can move forward and make certain reforms. But if we know exactly the nature of the regime, we know also that they are not going to move in the direction that can provoke a real change in Cuba.
And I try not to question the president's good faith, his interest in bringing about change. I do question his judgment about whether he understands who he's dealing with. I mean, and as you say, and this dynastic transition is a new angle that I think has to be discussed more. As long as he's keeping the power in the family, to the Raul Castro's son, or the Fidel Castro's son, or whatever, that they're willing to sort of generate a little more economic opportunity, as long as it's absolutely under the control of the family and the regime. For example, the hotels, the president's emphasizing flooding Cuba with American tourists. It's actually filling up the hotels that are, the vast majority of which are run by the military. Is that correct? Yes. Where do those tourist dollars go? And how does the regime go about sort of restricting contact of Cubans with
Well,
tourists?
I think that many people ignore that the person that is controlling the holding company, that is at the same time having relation with the foreign companies and with the tourist sector, the person that is controlling that is the son-in-law of Raúl Castro. They are now the one that have the monopoly of the tourist sector, and it is important to say also that the so-called paladares, or small restaurant, the one that can have more contact with the tourists, most of them are related with the power in one way or another. And if you have in Cuba a business that have certain profit, you at the same time need to behave yourself. You cannot be talking too much, because then they have the tools to close your business. Right. It is important to mention that in Cuba, there is the people that are in that cuenta propista, the so-called cuenta propista, or
self-employed.
Exactly, self-employed. They don't have a legal entity. They don't have property rights. They don't have license to import and export. Then always they are moving between the legal and the illegal system.
Right. And always vulnerable to the state.
Exactly. I think they build in that way because they want to be, that the people feel that they are vulnerable to the system.
Absolutely. And they have a system of sort of vacuuming cash out of people's pockets. I mean, the tourists come in, they tip, and the Americans are better tippers than Canadians, and that's great. But the system, you were saying to me earlier that the taxes on the income of the self-employed, it sounded astronomical.
Yes. I always like to mention how is working the tax system in Cuba. And it is important to say that in the income tax, after they have a kind of progressive way.
Very aggressively progressive.
Yes, and when you are over $2,000 per year, you need to pay 50% of your income. And this is completely amazing. Then who can say that we are going to have a new class of micro businesses, people, and medium, small businesses, when you need to pay that taxes? It is impossible to grow with this kind of tax system.
Are you optimistic or pessimistic about Cuba's future?
I am completely optimistic because the people in Cuba. We have seen in the last time that the reaction of the people is different. Before, we were accustomed to see the police repressing the activists in the street. Nobody complained, nobody say anything. Sometimes even some activists go to the street to try to have contact with the people, and the people were afraid. And we are facing now a completely different situation. There is a lot of videos showing that sometimes the police is coming to arrest a human rights activist or a political activist, and people go there and they try and they avoid that these people be arrested by the police. And also there are a lot of videos also showing a small protest in the street. Sometimes they throw information and people go immediately to take that information and to read. And this scenario is completely different. This is a scenario completely different, and that's why we are optimistic. I think that people are too tired of this regime, and I'm completely sure that soon we are going to see a different dynamics inside of the country.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, to sum up here, how are you able to move in and out of Cuba now? I mean, there was a time when there was total isolation. It seems to me that's one thing that has changed, where the government is allowing people to come and go and not forcing them to stay in exile.
I think that with this change, they have been sending a signal from the beginning. And the signal is you can go outside, you can speak. But when you be returned to the country, we are the owner of the country. And be careful, because we can put you in jail, we can do whatever we want. But at the same time, they need to pay certain cost, because they are forced to show a different face. They cannot be behaving in the same way that they behaved before. They need to say that this is not the previous totalitarian regime. And that's why some way they decide to take that step. I think that at the end, for sure, people are receiving more information, more contact, and this is going to, little by little, to make a change. Also because, as I mentioned before, the desire to be free of the people cannot be stopped by the regime.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I saw someone who was a firm defender of President Obama's opening policy of sort of normalization with Cuba and small opportunities for investment for outsiders. And she commented, "I'm afraid that political freedom will have to wait." And I was thinking, why is she afraid? I mean, it's the Cuban people who pay that price. And why can't these people who want to invest in Cuba also say, we want the rule of law, we want to be able to pay our workers, we want to be able to choose our workers, we want to be able to, that our workers not be under pressure from the regime, adequately compensated by us. And so it seems like sort of a cop-out, evading responsibility, these people that say, I want to invest in Cuba, but we're going to have to just wait for change. Is it fair for the Cuban people to have to wait?
I always like to make a comparison. Can you imagine which will be the answer of Rosa Parks if somebody say to her, don't worry, try to buy your boss, try to start with your small business, and little by little, in some moment, you will buy your boss, and nobody is going to care if you sit in the front main seat or if you go to the back seat. And I think that nobody is going to accept that. I want to be free.
It's a great
example. I want to be free in my country, and I cannot be waiting more. Many people have been waiting for a long time, and I think that Cubans need to be free right now, and we are going to continue pushing for that.
And with people like you coming and telling us about the reality, I hope we can motivate the American people to care and make them impatient for change and freedom in Cuba too. Thank you very much, Antonio.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you.
Great pleasure.
Thank you.
God bless.
Thank you.